So welcome everybody, my name's Simon Parkinson and I'm a researcher and lecturer here at Huddersfield University. So I'm here today to present this talk on digital biometrics and online identity, right, which feeds into some of the research that I do. So just to set the scene of what we're going over and give you some sort of context of what's coming. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about authentication in computer systems, right, what that is and how it works. I'm going to have a look at some of the challenges that exist there and why we might look at biometrics as a solution. We look at some different types of biometrics, and then we look at behavioural biometrics, and specifically key typing patterns, okay? And then we have a look at how they can be used to track somebody and identify their presence and their profile and their behaviour, and how we can use that to then work out if the person using the computer is somebody that we know, basically. So to set the scene, really, about biometrics and just these kind of authentication mechanisms and tracking mechanisms, we all leave a profile behind. We're leaving information when we're using systems, right? We can all understand that. But if we're leaving information which is unique to us, does that mean that somebody can actually track us quite easily? And does it mean that in services and using systems that we thought we were anonymous in, so like search engines, for example, when you're just typing a routine query, submitting it, you've not had to log in to do that. But are you actually anonymous? Can we reasonably, very confidently track who you are? So obviously we can track you by IP address, right, to the machine. We can have some confidence there. But I'm talking in terms of the user. Can we work it out? So to set the scene, right, because this challenge of authentication has been around for a long time, and it comes back from the early internet days, right? And this cartoon here, back from 1993 in the New Yorker, really sort of pokes a little bit fun at that. When in the early days of internet communication, you really had no idea of who you were communicating with, right? You didn't know if it was somebody, and you didn't know who that somebody was. This is a problem in distributed systems, right? Because if you've got a server and you've got a user, the server has to be able to confidently assume who that user is and then validate it. Because if they can't validate it, there's no trust. And if there's no trust, how can you ever do something that's personal or something that's of consequence, like financial transactions, right? You've got to be able to understand the person using it and have some trust over that they really are that person. How does that work in its sort of high-level and primitive way, right, that we're all very familiar with? Well, passwords are one very familiar authentication mechanism that we all use. When you register for a service like social media, for example, you claim a unique identity, could be a password, your email address, sorry, and then you suggest a password, right, which is your secret there. When you come to authenticate, you come to log in, you provide your ID, so you're claiming an identity, and then you provide the password which validates that that is your identity, right? So the password is the secret. Now there is a real significant problem with this approach, and it's the password, right? The password is the weakness, because if somebody gets your password, they can authenticate and pretend to be you, and the system would trust that that person that they're interacting with is actually the real person, and they're not, right? So the password is the issue. You can all imagine here, if you could log into your friend's social media account, you'd be interacting as if you were your friend, right? And you could do quite a lot of damage there. Now, passwords are obviously quite hard to guess. They start becoming more complex, longer passwords, more substitutions, that kind of stuff going on. But what you probably don't realize is that there's another significant weakness to password systems which makes them inherently insecure, and that's the fact that I can try and guess your password without you even knowing. So in rooms like this where we're all connected to Wi-Fi or even public Wi-Fi hotspots, you're sending your packet information through the Wi-Fi, right? You all know that's how communication's transferred. Now, your password is obviously transmitted as data, right, through the network, and anybody in the network can intercept it and read it. Very easy to do. Your password will be encrypted or hashed so that if anybody did intercept it, it's not in its readable form, right? So if your password was hello, and I captured your password with your packet with the password hello inside it, I wouldn't be able to read it very easily. But one thing that I can do is I can take that back to my office, and I can just sit there trying to guess it, trying to calculate what it was, right? And I can do that without you even knowing. I don't have to do it in real time, in the loop. I can just do it in my office and keep going until I get to the right answer. And then I can come back and attack your account. And it's really easy to do that. There are many applications out there which will capture network packet information, extract password hashes, and let people start in to hack, right? Really easy to do. And it's been like that for a long time. One solution to this, which we focus quite heavily on, and I do in research, is the use of biometrics, right? So you all probably are quite familiar with biometrics. In computing, we generally classify them as three different types. So we've got biological, chemical, and physiological. Biological, you'll be very familiar with. Patterns of the human body, basically, like fingerprints. So You'll know about fingerprints from crime, won't you? Where if somebody's committed a crime and they've touched something and they've left a fingerprint there, the police can quite confidently say that that person was at that location because their fingerprint was there. And that works because we know that fingerprints are quite unique, right? So we can tie people together. In a computational sense, we can do the same. You provide your fingerprint. As long as I can capture it, store it digitally, and then capture it again, I can check that the digital fingerprints match. And you do this quite often with your mobile phone, right? I believe a lot of you will be unlocking your phone all the time with your fingerprint. Yeah, so it's used everywhere. Some of the other ones, chemical, things like DNA, right? You all know that DNA is unique to individuals. Same again, it's used in crime. Could be used in computing authentication. The challenge is obviously capturing the DNA, right? It's not so easy to do. It's quite an invasive process. So that's not going to be ideal, is it? If every time you try to log into a computer, you've got to provide some blood sample, it's not a suitable solution. Physiologicals have been around for a long time. So an example really is telephone banking, right? When you're speaking over the phone, the bank needs to know if it's really you or not, right? Because it's easy for me to pretend to be somebody, but if we can actually extract patterns of behavior from your voice, and then we can match them in the future, we can have some good confidence over whether it is you or not, right? And that works very well and has worked for a long time on telephone banking. It's used now on banking applications that come through smart devices, like with your mobile phone, for example, or your Amazon or Google device. If you've got the banking application on there, you can check your balance and stuff like that. But that is verifying your voice, right? And that works very well. How do these work in practice, right? So how do these replace the password approach? Well, they work in effectively the same way. You come to the biometric system when you're setting it up. So you've got a new mobile phone. You provide it many samples, don't you, as you're enrolling. You put your finger on the fingerprint maybe 5 times. It takes that data, stores it in a database. Then when you come and provide a new sample, it matches them together, right? The difference, though, between the password approach is that when you're registering your biometric information, you often give it more than one sample, don't you? You give your same finger 4 or 5 times. The reason for that is because it's different every time you provide it, right? If you think about your finger on the phone, every time you put it on there, it's in a different position, different orientation. You might have a greasy finger one day. Your phone might be dirty. There are things in there which make the data that it captures not the same every time. So this decision that takes place this time is a bit more complex, right? Because with passwords, it's easy. If you have 8 characters, you've got the 8-character password, you've got the 8 characters you think the password should be, well, that's easy to work out whether it's a 100% match or not, isn't it? It's just matching. If you've got 2 fingerprints and you're working out do they match, well, then we know that they're never, ever going to be 100% the same, right? Because the sample's going to be different. And that's quite challenging, and a lot of research goes on in that area. Today, I'm just, we're not looking at how the system works, but I'm just communicating that these things are complex, and there's a lot of research goes on in that space. So an example that you might be quite interested in, and this links to the research I do actually, is a biometric based on your behavior around smart devices, right? Smart watches. So they're capturing your heart rate, step count, other activities you do in your day. Now you might be quite interested to know that everyone's actually quite routine, right? We have systematic behaviors, and them systematic behaviors it can be observed from your health information quite easily. And if we can observe them, then we can match against whether what you're doing now is really what we'd expect you to do now, right? And an example there is on that graph on the right-hand side where that's showing 5 people's heart rates for a 24-hour period divided into 30-minute segments, right? So for each 30 minutes, it's just the average heart rate for them people. Now, the reason I put that there is to visually show you the difference, right? 24 hours, you can see that then 5 people have distinct different heart rate patterns. Now, what I've not shown you here is that it's repeatable and that then people will do very similar things, 24 hours, 24 hours. And that's useful because it means if we get a new authentication request, we could use the heart rate, match it against that person's heart rate in the past, and work out whether or not it looks nice, whether it matches. So, it's an interesting use of authentication. The reason we focus on that one as a good example is because it's captured without any additional effort, right? It's just captured by having the device on your wrist. We don't have to ask the user to provide any new samples. You don't have to provide your fingerprint. You don't have to type a password. It's just captured in the background. So, from a computing point of view, it's great. Now, the one I'm going to talk about today and give you some insight into how well it can work is key timings, right? This is another area I'm particularly interested in. I'm interested in it because from an authentication point of view, it's a brilliant system because it's effectively 2-factor authentication in one, right? So you all know what 2-factor authentication is, don't you? When maybe you're using your online banking, you provide your password, you log in, but then it asks you also to verify a number that comes through your mobile phone, right? So there's two things used there, your password and the number on your mobile phone. So it's two-factor. Another one could be a password and an authentication app on the phone. Those two factors increase the strength. But with key timings, what we can do is we can ask the user to type their password, check whether it's right or wrong, but we can also inspect the way they type their password and see if that matches what we expect. So keystroke biometrics are actually just the time stamps at which you press and release a key, okay? And we can take the duration there, so how long you pressed the key for and how long you took between typing the next key. So an example to show you is this video here where there's two people typing the same phrase, action, right? Action is what they're typing. It's already slowed down 50%, try and make it a bit more visible. But what you can see here is that the top person is typing more quickly than the bottom person, and the top person is also using different fingers for different keys, right? Now, why is this important? What I'm showing you here is that people are inherently going to type differently, right? Because there's no standard way to type. You don't get taught that finger there only ever gets used for the H key. You know, everybody has a different behavior. The way you type is different. And because you're using different fingers and we're all processing at a different speed, moving at a different speed, it means the timing information that we record is different too, and distinctly different. And to give you an example there, here's 5 people typing that same phrase, action, right? And this graph is showing the duration that they held each key for. So each coloured line there is a different person. And you'll notice that the first 3 keys, A, C, T, they're quite close together, aren't they? They look quite similar. And I think that's actually because a lot of the way that people type, the left hand will probably do the ACT, and then when they move over to the other side, they tend to use different fingers, we've observed. So that's why we see a greater difference there. But because we can observe a difference there in the timings, that means that the computer will also be able to identify that difference and quantify it, right? Now, to show you a little bit about this in action and give you a sort of an insight into some research we do and how it can be used, really, I'm going to present a little bit of a case study on some research we did, okay? So in this research, we had 65 participants, and we asked them to type 40 passwords, and we asked them to repeat each one 4 times. And the purpose of this was we wanted to get an understanding of how well we could match people together, right? So 65 people typing the same passwords. Now, them passwords are on the right-hand side of the screen there, and you'll notice they're actually in blocks of 8, right? The first block has no substitution, just all lowercase. They're going in increasing length, right? 6 to 12 characters. The next block of 8 have an uppercase substitution. Then the next block have a number substitution. The next block have a symbolic substitution, like pound sign, etc. And then the final 8 have like a combination of all 3, uppercase, numeric, symbol in there too. The reason we did this research is because we were particularly interested in how the system behaves with these different password characteristics. Because if we're implementing this biometric system, we want to know whether we can make the requirement for the user's password to be easier to remember, right? So by having biometrics working at the same time, can we make it that the users can have shorter and less complex passwords because we're using the timing information too? What we did here is we took the 4 samples, right, and we divided them into 2 different sets, right? The first 3 samples for a participant typing a specific word became like their test set that was enrolled in the database. Much like when you take your mobile phone and you provide the fingerprints and it stores them, then first 3 samples were stored just like that. And the 4th one was the test one, right? So a new person coming to the system to try and authenticate, sorry. So what did we see there? Well, we generally observe that shorter passwords with no substitutions actually give a better accuracy. So when we're talking about accuracy there, we're talking about users being correctly recognized or correctly rejected, right? That's what we want here. The higher the accuracy, the better. So, if we've got 100, we're perfect. But biometric systems are never perfect, and that's because we can never get a clean sample, right? There's always a difference, especially with behavioural biometrics. Although we have routine patterns in the way we type, there's going to be a bit of variation, and we have to account for that. Now, what do them results actually mean? So overall, we had a 92% accuracy, right? If we take all the different phrases and we look at them for all the different people. Now, that means we have 4,747 correct authentications and 413 rejected ones. Now, those numbers look quite large considering we've only got 65 users and 40 passwords. So how's that happened? Well, that's happened because of the way we've done the testing, right? So we take every user's 4th sample and match it against their previous 3 and get a yes or a no, okay? Does it match? But we also take every other user's test sample and match it against that specific user and work out if it's a yes or a no as well. Why are we interested in that? Well, that would represent your friend coming to your phone, putting their finger on it and seeing if it works, right? That's what we're particularly interested in here, because if it does work and they get accepted, then we've got some false acceptance going on, right? Where the users managed to authenticate themselves by providing a sample which was not from the right person. So we're interested in that. We're also interested in when the correct timing sample or the correct fingerprint, you could imagine here, is rejected. So this is a false rejection. The false rejections are user inconvenience, right? They're not a security concern. It just means we're inconveniencing the user. But false acceptances are a big problem because we've let somebody in we shouldn't do. So you can see here 413. It sounds a lot, but it's actually not, considering we consider all the different combinations of the 40 phrases and the 65 users. So what are the implications of that, right? If we can only, get 92% accuracy, are people using it? Well, they are, right? People are developing it. People like myself and organizations in research and innovation, they are developing biometric solutions. The reason that we put so much effort into them is because we want to improve the security whilst minimizing user inconvenience. We have to find new ways to authenticate users. Computing's everywhere now, right? It's used throughout daily life, whether it's a physical laptop, whether it's your smartphone, your smartwatch. All these devices need to have some confidence over who they're interacting with, and they have to have ways of authenticating. So we have to be continuously developing new mechanisms. And with keystrokes, exactly the same. Many organizations are. Now, where are they used? Okay, because you might be thinking, is this just a research thing? Does it actually get used in the real world? Well, it does. It is in existence. And I've just put some areas there where you can observe it happening. And if you search online, you'll find many case studies where organizations are using it. In retail, you tend to see that it's used on the sort of point of sale applications, so the checkouts, to verify the person who's doing the transaction is who they are, and also if there's a problem afterwards, they can track who it was, right, with confidence. So it's no longer saying that user was the one logged in. We can determine confidently that the user typing at that specific time was a particular person, right? So it's not just about who authenticated. Why is that important? Well, many people unlock the PC and leave it active, right? And once it's active, somebody could just come and use it then. So we need to have that continuous authentication. Assessment centres, so this happens in the UK. Examples are things like theory tests for driving, right? Now you might be thinking, why would you use key timings there? Well, the reason is to make sure that it's the same person that finished the test as who started it, right? Why is that important? Well, it's no good, is it, if somebody presents themselves to do a test, sits down, and then switches, right? Somebody else does it, because that would be matching the incorrect result to the incorrect person. So we need to be able to confidently say that the right person finished it. How does that work? Well, that works by monitoring your key timings as you're going through the application from start to end and making sure there's no change, right? It's exactly the same application. Finance, exactly the same. Financial transactions, banking systems, they use it to make sure that the user is who they expect. And a lot of that is based on number key timings, not character. And then social media as well. Social media, you see, largely active. It's probably the biggest area, actually. It's used there to get some understanding of when people are interacting with the platform, posting materials, whether or not it's consistent with how they posted before. Because one of the things that people adversaries like to do with social media accounts is take over them and then use them for malicious purposes, right? Because they can probably broadcast information to a large amount of people pretending to be that person. And that might be quite influential, okay? You could imagine there's many people in the world who hold influential social media accounts, and if someone has the ability to put material through them, it could have quite large consequences. So if the social media platform learns your typing behavior, and then somebody else comes and types something and tries to post it as you, it could quite easily detect that and stop it. So it has uses there too. But let's just have a think about the implications, right? Because it goes further than just research. And it sounds great in terms of authentication, right? From a security point of view, which I'm interested in, this system and these systems of biometrics are very good. But there are other things we need to consider. The first one is legal, right? So you all know what a keylogger is, I assume. So a keylogger is an application, goes on a PC and just logs the keys, stores them in the background. Why is it doing that? Well, probably to capture password information. So, for example, at the schools and colleges you're at, if somebody installed a keylogger on the device, it could be capturing everything you're typing. So when you go to social media platforms and log in, it'll capture your username, password, and then someone can use that, right? They've captured your account details. Key biometrics is effectively a keylogger, right? we're really after the timing information, but because we're also recording the character that's been pressed at that time, we're storing all that information. We're storing it for use which we think is good, right? Authentication. But what would happen if the data that I'm storing is stolen or leaked, right? What are the consequences of that? Now, if I have a system that is inherently insecure, I've been negligent and I've stored the data in a really bad way, somebody comes along and steals it, and by stealing it, they can then launch attacks and log into people's accounts. I enabled that, right? I'm an accessory, my negligence caused that, and under UK law, because that data is highly personal, I could be prosecuted for that as the technology provider. So we must think about stuff like that. We run the risk here of developing a system for a good purpose to improve security, but we could actually be introducing a significant security threat too. Then there's the ethical application of this, or the consequences, right? Authentication has a good use for it, but I think you can all agree that there are many other uses for this data which could have big consequences, maybe positive for some organizations, but potentially negative for you if you did not know it was happening. So imagine a search engine, for example. A search engine doesn't require you to log in, right? You just go there, you search, you're largely anonymous, it only knows your IP address. But wouldn't it be good for that search engine if it could monitor your queries that you're putting in there and it could group them together? So it could be confident, regardless of what PC you're using, regardless of whether you're on a mobile phone, on a desktop PC, if it could take your timeline of search queries and confidently say that they were by the same person. Why would that be useful? Well, that would be really valuable information for marketing, right? And giving you targeted advertisements. So the priority results at the top, the ones that they want you to click on, could be influenced by your historic search, not just your current one. And that could be big business, right? And there's loads of applications like that could exist. So we have to think about that. We're trying to do it for the authentication, the good purpose here, but it could be used for something else. And we might only know about it if we start reading the terms and conditions of the applications using it. So things we want to consider, things we should know really, just based on these kind of biometrics and what we might want to be aware of in the future. Well, if we think about typing, for example, it's everywhere, right? We use it daily, whether we're on laptops, PCs, phones, we're typing everywhere. That information, we have to provide it, we can't avoid it. Now, do we know if somebody's recording them timings? Before coming here, you probably had no idea that people might be recording your timing information and using it for some purposes, right? I think you can agree with that. But they are. And you want to know about that. The reason you want to know about it is because your timing information is unique to you. Therefore, under the UK definition of personal data, it is personal data. It belongs to you. And it's your data, right? Because it's identifiable to you. Just like your name, address is, right? It's the same. And if they have that data, they're holding personal data on you. If it's stolen, it's personal data. We need to be aware of where it's going. You're leaving that simple signature behind, and its use is great potentially. So you need to have the knowledge about it being there, and hopefully you'll go away thinking about that. So things just to wrap up then. From a computer science perspective, where I am, right, as a researcher, these biometrics are really good because they give us ways to increase security of systems, minimize user inconvenience, and really allow us to develop things that are better, right, more secure. That's what we're interested in. Has a great potential. But from a user perspective, we need to be careful, and we do need to educate the users about what data we're capturing. I think it's quite clear we need to do that. We need to allow mechanisms where users can delete the data, where they can have a right to remain anonymous if they wanted to afterwards, go back and wipe it. But we need to provide them mechanisms. So thank you everyone for listening. Hope you found that interesting. Nice short lecture for you there. And now I'm going to pass over to Lee.
So first of all, have you always been interested in computers? Can you think back to when it first sort of sparked an interest for you?
So I think for me, really, it was when my parents first bought a computer in the mid-90s. It was an old one, Windows 95. Slow internet connection, as you'd imagine. And in that era, really, it was a time of modification to get the computer to do things which, you probably as a teenager were interested in doing. A good example, really, was like MSN Messenger. That was really prolific at the time as a communication mechanism. We weren't on mobile phones, we weren't on WhatsApp, but MSN Messenger was a great way. But you could do some quite interesting, very easy sort of cyber attacks to MSN Messenger at the time. So you could quickly send your friend loads of messages. But because everyone was on a slow network connectivity, you tended to have a faster upload than you did download. And you could overload their PC just by sending them too many messages and hitting enter faster than they could receive them. And you could crash the PC, which was great fun, right? You know, everyone, you could imagine as a teenager, taking your friend offline was an enjoyable experience.
So that was the first kind of online prank that you could enact. That's brilliant. Can you think back to when you decided you could make a career out of what obviously started for you as an interest or a hobby?
Yeah, I think when I went to university really is where that happened. When I went to university, I did computer science and with cybersecurity, effectively the pathway we have now. And that really opened up my mind to what goes on behind the scenes, really. So I was largely, before going, just a hobbyist where I tinkered with computers in the spare time and, you know, experimented with them a little bit. But I didn't really know much about what was going on under the hood. You know, I didn't really understand how to create programs, what was really happening. And at university, I think that was really opened there. And then I realised that, you know, there's a lot going on here, and things change so quickly, and being part of that innovation is quite exciting.
And can you think, were there any particular role models that you sort of shaped your career and your journey?
Yeah, I think for me, actually, I wouldn't say one in particular. I'd probably just say a group of people, and it tends to be the people who are, you know, doing something innovative. So when I was at university, there was quite a lot of researchers researching computer science, and that was taught on the pathway I was on. And you get to see what they were doing, right? You know, the fact that they were trying to do new things. It just seemed really exciting, and that drew me in, to be honest. Before that, I thought computing was quite a boring, dry subject, right? Where, you know, at college you were just building some websites and not, you know, you didn't really understand what was going on and how things were changing and how quickly they were changing. And once that was opened, yeah, then I thought that's where I want to go.
And you talk about how things quickly were changing. They really are at the moment, aren't they? And there seems to be just an explosion in the need for people with skills and qualifications in all different types of computer science backgrounds. Do you see that continuing for people like we've got today for their future careers?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, computing is used just about everywhere now, right? And it's continuing to increase. Is that you see more and more devices, more organizations that previously had no computing resource internally, maybe they're all manually based, human based, you know, they're all computing based now. They need to have expertise within house. There's a huge demand in the UK for certain areas of computer science. I don't see that slowing down. You know, it's not something where it's just everybody's going to start using it and then it'll stabilize. You know, the next thing comes along, right? And, you know, the way computing is used continuously changes. And I think that will just keep going.
The other thing, I suppose, is there's so many different flavours. You've mentioned yourself lots of different things like cybersecurity, computers, programming. How can people sort of hone their focus and decide what their passion is within the broad subject of computer science?
Yeah, so I think really that happened for me at university, where I got an experience of all the different areas. I think it's quite hard before actually doing something in each of them to make an assessment over where your interests might lie, because the buzzwords you see and the application does not necessarily sort of link really with the technology. So, you know, you hear about a lot of people doing, or they have a sort of aspiration to go into AI, for example. But what goes on in AI is probably quite different to how you might see if you just looked at how it's used. And only at university really is that kind of unpicked a little bit, where you start looking at all these different technologies, and then you can take specialist modules in them and focus your degree really. Very good question, actually. And that is actually an active area of research, because there is a noticeable difference between how people type on different keyboards, but it's repeatable. So how you type on a mechanical keyboard is repeatable, and how you type on a laptop is repeatable. So a lot of the systems that are enrolling you and taking your data, they capture it over time. So it's not actually a static thing. So if you like a bank, for example, banking application, you don't register your timings at the start. It's continually updating them as you're using it. And then it basically looks for something that's just too suspicious, if you see what I mean. So it evolves, yeah.
So that was a really good question about the difference between keyboards and how that influences your research. Thank you for that. The question from the live stream was, do you ever help the police with forensic computing investigations?
Yeah. So we do actually, yes, not with live cases, because they're all handled in-house, but we do help them with developing new techniques on historic cases. Whether that's things around identity, so, you know, taking perhaps large amounts of computer information, which dictates how you've used the machine, right? Your login and log out activity, trying to build up behavioural profiles there to confidently say who was using it at the time. We do some research with them around data mining, so trying to find certain patterns in data which can be valuable. Image recognition tasks, yeah, we do actually quite a lot. It's interesting work.
Yeah, you keep mentioning that word data, and I think that's something that I was really surprised at, that when you look at a lot of data science roles, it's actually relating to computer science skills, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, data's everywhere, right? It's generated from computing systems and it's used by them. And you're absolutely right. I think a lot of positions that exist out there now, data science positions, are just trying to unlock the value of the data, aren't they? Use it in the right way. Whereas in computer science, we might be more interested in the techniques to process the data, how to do it more efficiently, how to find the patterns more accurately.
So what did you study in school?
All right. So yeah, when at college, so I did biology, chemistry, and computing at the time. Yeah, those 3 year levels, and then computing's what made me come to the university. Really, I quite liked it and came on from that.
The question was around, because Simon's title is obviously Dr. Simon Parkinson, but I think if I drop off my stool, he's not the person to ask. What's your doctorate actually in, Simon?
So computer science. Yeah. Computer science. So what it means with a lot of disciplines is it means that you've gone on from doing an undergraduate degree to a postgraduate doctoral degree, which is like a 3 year research piece, and you submit a thesis at the end, defend it, and then you get the PhD award. Just in the UK, we call ourselves doctor with a PhD. Some countries don't, but we like to. But yeah, nothing medical.
Great. So what one piece of advice would you give to somebody wanting to get into this area of computing?
Yeah, it's a really, really difficult one, that is. But I think I'd probably say follow the interest, follow your interests really, because if you want to launch a career in computing, you do want to be interested in it, right? You want to focus on the part you enjoy. Because computing itself is a massive area and there's so many distinct roles within that. So I think it's really important to follow the part you're interested in, which doesn't necessarily mean, to start with, that it's the one that looks like it's the money maker, right? You do see that in computing where some roles look very attractive in terms of finances, but it's not always the case. So be cautious there, and I think really follow the area you're interested in.
That's a really good question. So your interest peaked in the 90s when a lot of our audience were not born. I wish I could say the same, I can't. But what's kept your interest through all those years? Yeah,
it's a very good question. That I think it really comes down to the fact that it's not something that just is fixed, right? Computing, the challenges in research really are difficult to solve, and they're continuously pushing forward, and we'll never get to a place where it's finished and we all go home. And I think because the challenge evolves in terms of complexity and the way it's used or the way it's presented, it really keeps you interested. And I think maybe that's not necessarily true of all disciplines, where things might be a bit more static. You solve the problem and then it solves, and what's next? But computing, you're never at the end point. No, it's a very good question, actually, a really good point. So you're right, somebody could steal it. But the thing to remember here is that if somebody stole the biometric data, how usable actually is that? Because if they stole your password, then they could go and type it. But if they steal your timing information, how can they replicate that? They'd have to spend a lot of time trying to train themselves. And remember that the way we type is very quick, milliseconds. It's really, we've actually done some studies where we have tried to see how people can learn to type like somebody else, and it's really difficult, really is. So in reality, probably wouldn't be useful. So the biometrics probably still holds.
So your question was around cyber attacks and how we're preventing them and the percentage that's happening.
Yeah. The percentage, I'm not too sure, actually, based on what comes from the user, although I know it's a high number, and in the government reports, it's quite astonishing, the value linked to it. But you're right to mention the users, because now systems are actually quite secure. So if we go back to them sort of 95 PCs, they were inherently insecure, and there were so many vulnerabilities that existed that it was so easy to launch an attack against somebody. It wasn't difficult at all. But now operating systems in general are very secure, and the way to get something to happen from an adversary point of view, someone attacking, is often you need to trick the user to run something, right? To run that malware, because there probably isn't a way to get it to run itself. The way to do that is, tricking the user, whether that's through phishing or something like that, where you send them an email pretending to be somebody, trying to trick them to download something and install it. That's where a lot of the attacks are coming from now. And you see a lot of organizations trying to prevent the sort of the pattern of where users are causing the issue by either restricting them or educating them, but it'll never go away, that one.